In 1191, monks at Glastonbury Abbey claimed to have discovered the burial site of King Arthur and Queen Guinevere, key figures in the Grail legend. The proof? A lead cross bearing Latin inscriptions that mysteriously disappeared shortly after its discovery. What if this wasn't just medieval propaganda, but part of a carefully orchestrated revelation about the most enigmatic artifact in Western consciousness? Welcome, mystery hunters. Today we're tracking a legend that has captivated kings, knights, poets, and seekers for nearly 1,000 years. A vessel said to contain divine power, immortality, and spiritual transformation. But what if the Holy Grail isn't just a cup from the Last Supper, but something far more profound? A symbol of transcendence hidden in plain sight throughout history. The Grail first emerges in our collective consciousness around 1180 CE, when the French poet Chrétien de Troyes penned Perceval, le Conte du Graal. In this unfinished romance, the Grail appears as a mysterious processional object in a castle, ruled by the wounded Fisher King. Picture a grand hall illuminated by torchlight, where a strange procession unfolds before a bewildered knight, a bleeding lance, followed by a golden vessel adorned with precious stones, radiating light that outshines every candle in the room. But here's where things get interesting. Chrétien never actually calls it the Holy Grail, nor does he explicitly connect it to Christ. That association came later, when Robert de Boron reimagined the Grail as the cup used at the Last Supper, later used to catch Christ's blood at the crucifixion. Suddenly, a mysterious Celtic cauldron of plenty transformed into Christianity's most sacred relic. What if both interpretations are simultaneously true on different levels of reality? As Julius Evola suggests in The Mystery of the Grail represents a symbol of the primordial tradition that transcends any single religious framework. Evola writes that the Grail signifies not just a Christian mystery, but a Hyperborean mystery, connecting it to ancient solar traditions that predate Christianity by millennia. Imagine standing in the misty forests of medieval Britain, where Celtic traditions of magical cauldrons that grant wisdom, rebirth, and abundance merged with Christian symbolism to create something entirely new. The Grail narratives emerged during a pivotal moment in European history, the transition between the Dark Ages and the flowering of medieval culture. This wasn't just storytelling, it was spiritual technology. The Grail quest itself follows a consistent pattern across various medieval texts. A knight encounters the Grail castle, witnesses strange phenomena, but fails to ask the crucial question that would heal the Fisher King and restore the wasteland. Only later, after numerous trials and spiritual development, does the hero return to fulfill his destiny. Sound familiar? This mirrors what Joseph Campbell would later call the hero's journey, a universal pattern of transformation found across world mythologies. Patrick Paul, in his esoteric studies of the Grail tradition, points to the curious fact that in many versions, the Grail isn't hidden at all. It's displayed openly, yet remains invisible to those who aren't spiritually prepared to perceive it. What if the greatest mysteries aren't concealed by elaborate secrecy, but by our own inability to recognize what stands before us? The Grail romances spread like wildfire across medieval Europe, with each region adapting the story to reflect local traditions. In Germany, Wolfram von Eschenbach's Perceval reimagined the Grail as a stone fallen from heaven, lapsit exilis, possibly connected to alchemical traditions. In the Iberian Peninsula, the Grail became associated with the Chalice of Valencia, supposedly brought to Spain by St. Peter himself. But what if these weren't just entertaining tales for the medieval nobility? What if they contained coded instructions for spiritual transformation, hidden in plain sight? Could the Grail quest be what Robert Elwood describes as an initiatory path disguised as adventure literature? After all, the knights who succeed in the quest aren't the strongest or most valiant. They're the ones who develop specific spiritual qualities: compassion, self-knowledge, and the courage to ask the healing question. But what exactly is this question that unlocks the Grail's power? And why does failing to ask it perpetuate suffering across an entire kingdom? Here's where our mystery takes an unexpected turn. The crucial question that Perceval fails to ask in the original Grail story is deceptively simple. Whom does the Grail serve? Not what is the Grail, or where did it come from, but a question about its purpose and relationship to others. What if this seemingly straightforward query is actually the key to understanding the entire Grail tradition? In the words of medieval scholar Helen Adolph, the Grail serves, but it also tests, it nourishes, but it also judges. The question reveals that the Grail isn't about possession, but about service, a radical inversion of the typical quest for power. Imagine the shock of medieval audiences, conditioned to tales of conquest and acquisition, encountering a story where the hero's task isn't to seize a treasure, but to ask the right question about whom it serves. This subtle shift transforms the entire framework of heroism from external conquest to internal transformation. The most mind-bending aspect of the Grail legend emerges when we examine its historical context. The 12th and 13th centuries were a period of intense spiritual exploration and renewal within medieval Christendom, with various movements seeking deeper expressions of faith. This era saw both the flourishing of monastic orders dedicated to contemplative practice and the emergence of new theological perspectives. What if the Grail romances weren't just entertainment, but vehicles for exploring profound spiritual questions? During this period of religious ferment, the evidence is circumstantial but compelling. Wolfram von Eschenbach explicitly connects his Grail guardians to the mysterious Templisen, an apparent reference to the Knights Templar, who were themselves dissolved by the French crown and papacy in 1307. Consider this startling possibility. The Grail literature emerged during a time when both secular and religious authorities were deeply concerned with questions of legitimate spiritual authority. The Grail stories don't present a simplistic opposition between institutional religion and personal spirituality. Rather, they explore the complementary relationship between external forms and internal realization. Julius Evola suggests that the Grail represents a symbol of solar spirituality connected to imperial tradition. However, this doesn't imply a rejection of hierarchy. Both imperial and ecclesiastical traditions maintained structured authority while simultaneously valuing direct spiritual experience. The medieval church, after all, produced mystics like Bernard of Clairvaux and Hildegard of Bingen alongside its institutional structures. What if the Fisher King's wound, which leaves him alive but unable to fully live, ruling a kingdom turned to wasteland, symbolizes not opposition between systems, but the spiritual crisis that occurs when external forms become disconnected from their inner meaning, a civilization possessing great knowledge but lacking the wisdom to heal itself. This interpretation gains credibility when we examine how the Grail legend has continuously resurfaced during periods of cultural crisis. From Wagner's 19th century opera, Perceval, during the Industrial Revolution, to the Grail symbolism in T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland after World War I, the Grail reemerges whenever Western civilization confronts its deepest wounds. But perhaps the most provocative question is this: what if the Grail was never meant to be found, but to inspire the search itself? As the 13th century Queste del Saint Graal suggests, the ultimate achievement isn't possessing the Grail, but becoming worthy of it. The Grail legend continues to haunt our collective imagination precisely because it operates on multiple levels simultaneously: historical, psychological, spiritual, and alchemical. Like the Grail itself, the meaning shifts depending on who encounters it and what questions they bring. In the 20th century, scholars like Emma Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz explored the Grail as a symbol of psychological wholeness, the integration of conscious and unconscious elements of the psyche. Meanwhile, traditionalists like René Guénon saw in the Grail a symbol of the primordial tradition, preserved through initiatic lineages across centuries of turbulent history. What if both perspectives capture essential facets of the same multidimensional mystery? The Grail's power lies in its ability to transcend categories, functioning simultaneously as historical artifact, spiritual symbol, and psychological process. Consider the curious fact that many medieval Grail texts describe it not as hidden in some remote location, but as moving openly through the world, visible only to those with eyes to see it. As the 13th century Perceval tells us, the Grail appears in different forms to different people, as a chalice, a stone, a dish, or even a blinding light, depending on their spiritual state. This suggests something profound about the nature of mystery itself. Perhaps the greatest secrets aren't concealed by elaborate security systems or buried in remote locations, but hidden in plain sight, invisible only because we lack the inner qualities needed to perceive them. The Grail quest continues today, though its forms have evolved. From the archaeological expeditions seeking physical artifacts to psychological journeys toward wholeness, from spiritual seekers pursuing transcendence to artists and writers reimagining the legend for new generations, the Grail continues. To inspire the quest, what if the true power of the Grail lies not in finding it, but in becoming the kind of person who could recognize it if encountered? As medieval literature scholar Pauline Matarazzo writes, the Grail is less a thing to be found than a state to be achieved. Perhaps that's why the legend has endured for nearly a millennium, continuously reinventing itself while preserving its essential mystery. The Grail remains eternally just beyond our grasp, not because it's unattainable, but because attaining it transforms both the seeker and the nature of the quest itself. As we conclude our hunt for the Holy Grail, we're left with more questions than answers, exactly as the medieval authors intended. For in the realm of sacred mysteries, questions open doors that answers often close. Thirsty for more legendary quests and hidden histories? Hit subscribe to join our expedition into the world's most enduring enigmas. And remember, this journey through the Grail legend blends documented history with speculative connections based on scholarly sources. The real mystery might not be what the Grail is, but what it awakens within each seeker. What do you think? Could you recognize the Grail if it passed before you today?